Good artists borrow, great artists steal. So what in Bob's name is AI doing?
Perception is reality. Perspective shapes the world around you. I'm JJ Weinberg, and this is my perspective. Greetings and salutations. My name is JJ Weinberg. I am an artist, an alchemist, an author, a musician. I am artificial intelligence. And I'm none of these things. I want to first start by thanking Gogh, Barnes, and Denny for underwriting this show, Perspective. You can listen to Perspective live on Saturdays at noon, reruns on Wednesday at 6 p.m. on WVLP.org, and of course on the radio if you're close enough by. You can also find all of these episodes and past episodes on my website, jjweinberg.com. So please visit. You can see some of my art there and find some of my other writing. Eventually links to my music. I don't know if there are links to my music there right now. But anyway, here's the thing. We'll get into it. I've talked about artificial intelligence a lot here on this show. Large language models, AI, artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Suno, all kinds of things. There's all these different platforms. Steal like an artist, right? So if artificial intelligence is stealing from artists by learning from existing art, then what is it exactly that human artists have been doing for the last several thousand years? And it's when I hear this version, I think it was Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who I like Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and I like that he's advocating for things in some sort of stability around artificial intelligence for creatives. But then there's part of me where it's just like so naive, it seems like. I think it was a video or something where I heard him saying, kind of paraphrasing here, so forgive me. I don't have the direct quote, and I'm just trying to remember what inspired this thought. But he was saying something about how there needs to be a time with artificial intelligence that we use it to also identify essentially this is the crux of what he was saying. We need to be able to use the machine learning and everything that's happening to be able to identify what artists were influencing what that AI created based off of the prompts, based off of the person behind the prompts, to then meter out and compensate that artist. And I'm like, that is just, to me, that is so naive. I mean, to even, let's just say, for instance, the AI could do it, which I think is really, that part of it even seems like a stretch. It seems kind of weird. Well, let's just say it could. Say it took one of my pieces or a song or, I don't know, any piece of artwork or a video or whatever, and it said, here, these are the 6 artists, right, that kind of influenced this piece. What about the 6 artists that influenced each one of those 6 artists? Like, and how much do you carve up? And how do you appropriately attribute value to 6 artists from one YouTube short to say, oh, this goes to that and the other? It's goofy. And it shows to me, like, especially from artists that live in the world of simply creating and they haven't lived at all in the business world. I mean, Joseph Gordon-Levitt has, so he should know some of these things, I would assume. But like, there's such a naivete towards copyright and what's really working with copyright infringement, right? So if there's a difference between Vanilla Ice literally lifting dun 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 dun, and then trying to say, no, ours goes dun 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 dun. What are you talking about? It's the same bass line. That's the bass line. That's it. Note for note. It's copyrighted. Now, the style that he's, lifting from isn't copyrightable. You can't copyright style. You can only copyright direct lines. So it's like a lyric and a melody, and then, the notes in succession over a specific space-time, the beat, all of it. But so this idea that we're just going to give Rick James, I'm Rick James. He's going to get a cut of any time anything sounds something. You know what I mean? Like Super Freak. If the style has influenced an artist, Rick James gets a little bit of that. I mean, we obviously give praise to artists that influence other artists and say, wow, look at the impact that they've had on culture and people and other people's music. If you look at Led Zeppelin and Greta Van Fleet, a lot of people hate it. They're just copying Zeppelin. Well, first of all, they're not AI. Number one. Number two, they don't owe Led Zeppelin a red cent. They might owe them like, hey, thanks for influencing us. But then they also owe everybody who Led Zeppelin that, influenced Led Zeppelin. But they don't owe Led Zeppelin anything money-wise, monetarily wise. And this is what this argument around AI is. Oh, it's stealing from these artists. Led Zeppelin and Greta Van Fleet. Oh, now Greta Van Fleet has to pay. No, they don't owe Led Zeppelin anything. A thank you, maybe. And I'm sure that they enjoy and have been, they probably loved Led Zeppelin. I don't know the whole story with Greta Van Fleet, but they obviously sound like Led Zeppelin. And it's like they say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, right? Now, if they were to take a song of Led Zeppelin's and they're going to do Stairway to Heaven or something, and they copy it note for note, then you can't do that. That's copyrighted. Led Zeppelin's style is not copyrightable. So this argument against AI often rests on a contradiction. Human creativity has always been an act of absorption, influence, synthesis, and transformation. And to be honest, the AI is one of the things that it lacks being able to do great is transformation aspect of it. The real distinction isn't whether, AI learned from previous work. Everything does. Everybody does. The distinction is between copying and creating, between replication and transformation, between theft and synthesis. So I hear people saying it, the same thing. AI is stealing from artists. AI is stealing from musicians. AI is stealing from writers and stealing from filmmakers. Every time I hear it, I hear that same, like, really? Really? Since when? Since when did influence become theft? Since when did learning become stealing? Since when did humanity develop this religious belief in originality? I mean, we're always saying there's nothing original under the sun. But I often say that. I'm like, the artists that we reward the most are the ones that somehow step outside of the box. They do give us something that feels and seems original, But if we're going to have the conversation, we got to have the whole conversation. Again, not just the convenient or the emotional conversation, the whole conversation. So, easy, simple question. Who taught the Beatles to sound like the Beatles? Nobody? Did they simply emerge from their primordial soup one day, carrying revolutionary music down from a mountain? Of course not. The Beatles studied Chuck Berry. They studied Little Richard. They studied Buddy Holly. They studied Elvis and Carl Perkins and Smokey Robinson. They listened, they borrowed, they absorbed, they synthesized, and then they became the Beatles. I'm going to ask you, how much money did the Beatles give to Chuck Berry or Little Richard? Now, if they covered songs, they would have had to pay, fees on covering a song. That's guaranteed. But outside of that, they aren't paying Chuck Berry for every song that they had in their early career that Chuck Berry had influenced. I mean, that's part of what people were saying. It's unfortunate that some of these black artists didn't get their due as they were deeply influencing culture and music. And it's with the Beatles, it's like Revolution #9, the White Album. That's when the Beatles became the Beatles. Later on, Sgt. Pepper's, like, these are things where it's like, oh, wait, nobody's really doing that. That is a discovery. You know what I mean? And that's when they move forward. They move forward music into a different place. So we talked about Greta Van Fleet and Led Zeppelin. Who taught Led Zeppelin how to sound like Led Zeppelin? Again, nobody? Did Jimmy Page simply invent blues guitar? Did Robert Plant descend from heaven, already knowing those vocal inflections? Of course not. Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, Willie Dixon, Robert Johnson, Albert King, an entire lineage of Black American blues musicians laid the foundation that Zeppelin would build upon. And thank God they did, because what came out of that synthesis was magnificent. Nobody listens to Led Zeppelin, though, and says, that's just Muddy Waters. That's just Muddy Waters. Nobody listens to the Beatles and says, that's just Chuck Berry. Because they eventually transformed what they inherited. That's the entire point. The transformation, not the influence, the transformation. And again, who we talk about and what we praise in the world of art and creativity are those that transform. If we talk about Van Gogh, who did Van Gogh owe? Oh, that's right. Van Gogh was doing things that were somewhat unprecedented. I mean, he had his influences, of course, but overarchingly, we don't see Van Gogh before. We see Van Gogh's influence after. I mean, he was obviously influenced by Pissarro and the Impressionists and Japanese prints, Katsushika Hokusai. We know that. Great Wave. Of course, that was influencing him. He didn't invent thick brushstrokes. He didn't invent bright color. He didn't invent expressive landscapes. But he combined all of those influences with his own emotional intensity and perspective. Nobody would ever mistake a Van Gogh for a Hiroshige print or a Millet painting. But the ingredients were inherited. The recipe was his. That's why we call him a genius. Not because he created from nothing. But is he going to pay Pissarro? Does he owe Pissarro money? I mean, that's the big part of the equation. They're talking about the business of it, less than anything ethical, as far as owing a debt of gratitude or, naming it. But he transformed everything he touched into something unmistakably Van Gogh. So that's what we're going to champion. And I'm just telling you, artificial intelligence can't do that. It synthesizes at speeds faster than human beings can, all of these influences available, but it can't transform. Yet somehow we've reached this bizarre moment in history where people want to pretend that influence itself is the crime, that learning itself is the crime, that exposure itself is the crime. I just don't buy it. I don't buy it because every artist is somehow a collection of other artists, even if it's not super on the nose or right there in front of your face. Like, how many people would know, looking at and listening to my stuff, that I'm deeply influenced by Philip K. Dick, a science fiction writer? First of all, you probably don't even, a lot of times people don't even know that they're influenced by Philip K. Dick because they're not realizing that these movies that they're seeing, Blade Runner, Minority Report, Total Recall, are Philip K. Dick stories. So every writer is a library with a pulse. That's it. We're writers. We're libraries with a pulse. Every musician is a playlist wearing shoes. Every filmmaker is 100 films stacked on top of each other, pretending to be something new. It's not an insult. That's culture. That's civilization. That's how knowledge works. Children learn through imitation. Artists learn through imitation. Civilizations learn through imitation. The Renaissance was an imitation. Rock and roll was an imitation. Hip hop, undoubtedly, imitating. Every generation takes the generation before it and mutates it into something new. It's not a bug of the big technological virus that's going to eat us all. It's a feature. That's the entire mechanism. And this is where things really start getting funny. One of the most famous books on creativity in modern history is literally called, you ready? Steal Like an Artist. Think about that for a minute. The title itself is the argument. Steal like an artist. Not steal like a criminal, not steal like a plagiarist. Steal like an artist. Because artists have always understood something that the internet and all of this, crazy buzzwords and all the emotional reaction just seems to suddenly forget. Nothing comes from nowhere. Nothing. Every idea has parents. Every movement has ancestors. Every innovation has roots. The artist isn't creating from a vacuum. And I promise you, people who haven't created before, that are just using the tool as a shortcut, people say AI slop. It's true. They create AI slop. I'm not saying that the stuff there isn't a lot of stuff that's slop. There absolutely is. But slop is just something that exists. Sloppy copy is something that is what we call Fast and the Furious movie 13, or however many that they're on. Can proudly say I've never watched a single Fast and the Furious movie. It's just not my thing. But I'm really glad that I've not watched them now that there's literally over 10 in the series, I think. You think that isn't slop? Human slop? Who cares if it's AI slop or it's human slop is what I'm saying. It's just slop. It means that it's uninspired. It means it's not going to move anything forward. It means it's a cheap copy of itself. Hollywood's already been doing that. Now look at the ramifications of why sometimes, though, even though I despise it, right? Even though I love to celebrate wild creativity, when you have a lot of money on the line, it's hard to take those gambles. So these studios, the demand for return being so high, they can't necessarily gamble on creative ideas. They can't gamble on the next thing that's actually going to be the next thing because it might like not make enough money. I just saw whatever that horror movie is. I didn't see the movie. I'm saying Obsession, I think it's called. That it's beating Grogu and the Mandalorian in sales, right? Insane to think the actual impact of what that means. This first time director, I think he is, or she, I'm sorry, I don't remember who directed it, but the film is beating Grogu and the Mandalorian. One of the biggest, Star Wars, one of the most highest grossing, hugely impactful intellectual properties of all time. And this first time director thing is beating it. But I mean, George Lucas was once a first time director. And Star Wars was once a first time movie. But you know what I'm saying here is Hollywood, as it's structured now, before this AI thing, it can't take a gamble on these films. Now, if one of the positives that you have to acknowledge, if you're going to, again, tell the whole story, if you're going to actually look at this picture, you know, from a bird's eye view, is that this can create more opportunity for more creative ideas, for people who literally do know what they're doing, but they haven't had the ability to necessarily do things at a specific scale because they don't have the money. And the only way that you can get the money is to get into a Hollywood thing. And then Hollywood says, well, that's too risky. We can't do it. So then you become trapped. Now you might have the tools to be able to make certain things happen. I can say for myself specifically, my Bob Ross project, I hand drew hundreds, tens of thousands of circles and lines, just hours upon hours of poring over every minute detail in these illustrations, a celebration of Bob Ross's legacy and a question that I'm asking where, you know, I call it the Bobberverse and quantum physicists call it the multi-Ross, where every decision creates a new happy little hairdo. I don't know if you know this, but Bob, his fro, because we talk here a lot about metaphysics, we talk about serendipity and the golden thread that ties us all together. Well, Bob talked about happy accidents. His afro was literally a happy accident, so his whole career was a happy accident. The only reason he wasn't cutting his hair, he was trying to save money. He was living the cliche starving artist myth, and he's living that. He's wanting to save some money on haircuts, so he starts getting a perm. Tightening his springs is what he called it. He gets the perm to save money on haircuts as a broke artist. So then when he starts painting on PBS, and he's got that gentle tone, hi, I'm Bob Ross, and I'm going to help you make your vision a reality, right? He's got that soft, smooth voice, super calm, and he's painting these pictures. People are like, what? And he inadvertently, they create ASMR. Think about that. ASMR is an entire movement. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's basically the sounds of, you know, people. They have whole YouTube videos where it's like the person talking, breathing, crunching paper, running fingers, tapping across items, whatever it might be. These sounds that kind of give a person chills when they listen to the sounds, and they love it and they fall asleep to it and they meditate to it or just unwind. Bob Ross inadvertently really created that whole thing. I mean, people were experiencing it before, but the notion that it was recorded in such a manner, his shows were ASMR experiences, and it's a large reason why people listen to them still today, why they'll fall asleep to it. The reason why that happened, after Bob Ross left the Air Force, he was basically the equivalent of a drill sergeant in the Air Force. Mean. They said he was mean and loud and angry. You can't even imagine it, right? When he left, he said, I refuse to ever raise my voice again like that. I'm gonna change my whole demeanor. And he just, went head first into his painting. And so he's talking. Well, he was so low with his voice when they were in the studio that they had to crank up the mics to record him, to capture what he was saying. And so by cranking up the mics, they also would catch the way his paintbrush would tap on the canvas and bounce off of it. And you could hear that spring. You could hear when he'd take his palette knife across and scratch it off, scratch. You could hear that. When he would beat the devil, I gotta beat the devil out of this brush. It's my favorite part. He would bap. And that sound was captured because they had the mics super hot so they could record everything that was happening. So he inadvertently creates that. Same manner, his hair. Because of his hair, because he's trying to save some money, that's part of how he becomes a legend. Those are happy accidents that literally led us to Bob Ross being an important part still of modern culture, of pop culture. So I have this project, Happy Little Hairdos. And again, it's a metaphysical question. Man, if I cut my hair, I have long hair right now. I'm cutting my hair for this project. I've been growing it out for almost 3 years for a piece of art that I'm going to make out of my hair. My hair will become the medium. My friend Laura is going to do something with it. It's going to be crazy. Really cool. It's going to be a part of the Million Bob March. If you don't know about the Million Bob March, last year we culminated October 29th, Bob's birthday, in Washington, D.C., the Million Bob March. I had some friends with me, some close friends, some followers of the movement. Together, we showed up in Washington, D.C. I gave a speech right there where Dr. King delivered his I Have a Dream speech, dressed up in my Ross play, me as Bob Ross. And we're advocating for public media the same way that Mr. Rogers did in 1969. If you've never seen the video, go to YouTube and look up Mr. Rogers Goes to Washington, basically. Mr. Rogers in Congress, and watch what he did in 1969 to protect funding for public media. This isn't new for them to be going after public media, okay? But all of that to say, I've got this project, the Million Bob March. We're doing it again this year. If you would take a moment, go visit happylittlehairdos.com. If you're on Instagram, follow me on Instagram at JJ Weinberg, WEINBERG. But follow me on happylittlehairdos.com. If you have any interest in helping support this mission this year, please reach out to me. You can reach out to me on my website, jjweinberg.com, or happylittlehairdos.com. Contact info is on there. But I need people in this movement. I want more Bobs with me this year than last year. We did a number of activations. Bob mobs. People come dressed up with their Afro wigs on and blue denim. Very simple. And I do canvas protest signs, so you have a piece of art you can take home with you. It's really fun. It's the joy of protesting. But again, it's because Bob decided not to cut his hair because he wanted to save some money. Because without his fro, I really don't think that Bob would be as remembered as he has been. It's that juxtaposition that's kept him as an icon. It's that notion that I can put on a blue denim shirt and an Afro wig and you already know who I am. You can see it from a mile away. That guy's Bob Ross. Did Bob Ross make up the Texas tuxedo, the blue jeans up and down? No. Did he make up the afro hairstyle and the perm? No, of course not. But it's distinctly Bob now, you know? And I'm saying all of this because for the Million Bob March and through all these wild ideas that I've got, I have a comic that I'm working on. And it's a character that I've created called the Varnisher. He always finishes what he starts. And the Varnisher is based off of one of my childhood superhero, like one of my favorite superheroes in Marvel Comics, the Punisher. And of course, Bob Ross. It's Bob Ross meets the Punisher in the Multi-Ross, the Bobberverse. Now, first of all, it's quite obviously parody and satire. Am I saying that I invented the Punisher? Like that the Varnisher doesn't have his... Of course, that's insane. I'm deliberately pointing to the Punisher and that my character is a parody of that, of Bob Ross fighting to save public media and imagination and creativity. And with the project, I've painted along with Bob. I've got a canvas painting that I did with one of Bob's tutorials, the first oil painting I've ever done, actually. I mean, like I'm an artist and I went to the American Academy of Art, primarily doing illustration. I've painted a lot, but I don't paint landscapes, number one, and I don't use oil paint. So this was like really my first oil paint landscape ever. And then not long after I did that piece, I actually had the opportunity to paint along with Bob's son, Steve. And so I painted with Steve Ross. I got to meet Sally Shank. She was one of Bob's great friends, the director of every episode of The Joy of Painting. I still text Sally to this day. She said to me, Bob would have loved this. He would have loved you. Keep doing what you're doing. I was telling her how I was visiting Lurie Children's Hospital dressed up as Bob, you know, talking to the kids about imagination and creativity and their ability to make their world, like Bob would say. And so all of that said, I've spent countless hours on this project, creating videos, a metaverse. We have a whole digital landscape that you can walk around in like a video game that I created with my friend Benny, just the two of us. I mean, it's so many hours poured into this project. Well, now with this Varnisher character, I'm creating the comic, and I have a compendium, an encyclopedia of the characters, of the story arcs, of where this thing is going to go, visuals on what some of these things look like. You may have seen the Varnisher's Quiet Riot Shield. I actually appeared in an article in the New York Times last year as the Varnisher with this Quiet Riot Shield. And now what this shield has become, it's actually made of canvas, but I made it look like a riot shield. And the idea is that, you know, we say that the pen is mightier than the sword. And I'm saying that the canvas is stronger than any shield. Because, a riot shield made out of canvas seems absurd. It's the Quiet Riot. It's Bob's Quiet Riot Shield. It's the Varnisher's Quiet Riot Shield. You say, well, what the heck could that stop? Well, if you look at the Quiet Riot Shield now, it can stop, I think, it can stop evil. And I don't use the word evil. I'm only using it in the comic book sense. I think it could stop all of these bad intentions. I think it can stop fascism. I think it can stop the corporatocracy. Because if you look at the Quiet Riot Shield now, it has hundreds and hundreds of signatures on it. I've taken it to Washington, D.C. for the Million Bob March, to Chicago for our Bob Mobs, down to Muncie. It's going to go this time because last year we did another Bob Mob in Muncie which every episode of The Joy of Painting was shot right here in Muncie, Indiana. So I've had adults, older people sign it, seniors sign it. I've had children sign it, kids. And every signature is a sigil. To me, it's like every signature is a part of this fabric weaving together of intention and imagination. Now, I have that quiet riot shield appear in this encyclopedia. I'm coming all the way back to the point about AI, right? I would hope a person would see the originality and the idea that I have a project called Happy Little Hairdos, where I imagine Bob Ross as all of these crazy different hairstyles. He transforms into the Big Lebowski, to Frobocop, Wolf Froreen, Vincent Van Fro, all of these things. Because what I'm saying is, it's like, whoa, we see Vincent Van Gogh in this image, but that's Bob. When you look at the Steve Jobs, I have one where Bob is Steve Jobs. I just gave him Steve Jobs' haircut, his iconic glasses, his black turtleneck, and he's holding up an iPhone. And you would swear that the same portrait that I did of Bob Ross in 2014, when you see the illustration that I did where I changed Bob's hair and his clothes, just those things, his face stays exactly the same. But you would swear that it's just a drawing of Steve Jobs. So I'm asking, what are these masks that we wear? Where does our identity come from? This simple choice that Bob decided that I'm going to save money on haircuts and I'm going to have a fro. And then that turned him into, one of the most successful living artists. He's not alive now. I'm saying in his lifetime, he was one of the most successful artists in human history, as far as financially goes, which is ironic, right? Because Vincent Van Gogh, this is the tragedy of the Vincent Van Fro image. If you see it again, it looks like it's just a kind of an illustration. It's campy. It's a comic book parody, but it's not. It's deeper. It's what I'm talking about right now. The depth of it is that the tragedy of that image and what it represents to me as a piece of artwork, even though it looks like satire and just a comic illustration parody, it's Bob Ross as Vincent Van Gogh. And what it means to me is Bob became one of the most financially successful artists that is recognized as far as financially he was recognized, not in terms of gallery recognition or high art. He was never recognized. He's still not really recognized. But as far as his financial success, Bob was one of the most successful living artists in human history. And then after he passes, all of that success is stolen from him by his ex-business partners, stolen from his family, stolen from his legacy. Last year, I did some vignettes, right? And this is where we're going to circle back to all this AI stuff. I did some vignettes of Bob. I have this Bob as B for Vendetta. So it's Bob in a Guy Fawkes mask from V for Vendetta. And these vignettes that I did were talking about, and you can see these on happylittlehairdos.com. Actually, they'll come up in the pop-up, I think. You'll see one of them, and they link into my YouTube playlist, so you can definitely find them there. But what I did is I did use AI to help create some of these things and to get it into a production level of something that I would not have been able to do previous, not without a budget. Because I do videography, I do editing, I can do green screen and removing everything. I do all that stuff, and I did that for this thing. But what it was is I wanted to criticize this notion via B for Vendetta, via this Guy Fawkes mask, via this idea that V would be like, I'm not buying it, right? I'm not buying it. What I did was I had the mask already. I put the fro on, and I have a costume that I got that matches the V for Vendetta look. Well, here's a couple places where I used AI. I used AI to create the background scene and some things just slightly moving around in the background. It's crazy. I fed it my visual arts. I fed it, my illustration of Bob's face. I fed it the painting that I did along with Bob. And I'm like, I need this to be on a crate in a warehouse. And it took me a while. You don't just get, if you have any taste sensibilities, you don't get to just tell it and then it happens. If it'll give you something. But again, if you don't have any vision for what you're trying to create, you'll just accept the first thing that it gives you. But it took me a while, which is part of the misconception. If it's slop, then you just take the first thing, of course, boom, and it's probably going to show up as slop. But for me, I'm like, no, this isn't working. So I had to keep working on, no, this is what it needs to look like. Keep keying in and telling it, no, this is what it needs to do. Sometimes I would sketch out the loose sketch of exactly the framing of where I need everything to be. I would feed it that. Here's where I need that picture to fall on this image. And then I create the still image. And it looks like a background in a Hollywood scene, right? Of these crates holding these paintings. And then I would still have to go back in and recomposite stuff over top of them in Photoshop, still having to touch things up. And then I got that image and I brought it back into a video generator and said, I need this to be a 5-second loop where these candles are blowing. These candles are just kind of blowing, and these banners that have my imagery and my icons that I drew by hand, I need those floating around on those. I couldn't do that previous to this. I mean, there are some places where I've done it with After Effects, and I can do a little bit of that, but this empowered me to create that. And then on top of it, the voice. I'm like, oh, I want something to sound the British. I want it to sound like the inflection of what V's voice sounds like. So, and it's a parody. It's a complete parody. So I was able to use AI to get this voice to help me create this tone. The music, I'm a musician. I was humming parts that I want this to sound like this, and now I need this to sound like a full orchestration. And it pulled this thing together. And I have this production. Go watch it on happylittlehairdos.com. And what I'm trying to tell you is that it wasn't just punch it in and it's there. I still had to create a lot of stuff, and it took me a lot of time to create these little vignettes for me to criticize the Kowalski family. Because what I'm saying in it is last year they were doing not supposedly, they did. But I'm talking about their intention. A lot of times we talk about context and intent, like we did in the last episode about the swastika floor in Valparaiso, right? If you haven't listened to that episode, find it on my website, jjweinberg.com/perspective. But we're talking about intention here, and they were auctioning off these paintings of Bob's to benefit PBS. And I was just like, oh, really? Isn't this convenient? Really? Are you? Because one, why not let Steve, if we're talking about credit, for the Beatles to Chuck Berry, why the heck would we not be jumping up and down about credit for Steve Ross for those paintings? Why not let Steve auction them off for PBS and get the credit for his dad, for his family's legacy? Oh, that's right, because Steve doesn't have the paintings, you do. Bob Ross Inc. has over 400 paintings stored that they've kept. And so you're telling me that I'm not supposed to believe that you might not maybe be wanting to raise the value of all of those paintings because for this thing, people are definitely going to step up and give a lot of money because of Bob's legacy, and maybe it's his time to shine. And I got to come back to this Van Gogh thing here. That's where this all settles on as well. But they're going to give more. They're going to give more than they might have in the past because we know it's going to PBS. So now you've established a baseline value for all the other 400 paintings that you have plus. Why not give them to Steve? Give them back to his son. Because not only did Steve not get them from father to son, not only did he not get the brand name and the recognition and the legacy, But the Kowalskis kept it after Bob died, and then they were able to hand it down to their daughter. Come on now. That's obscene. And it's not just. But the tragedy, again, Bob becomes one of the most successful. Bob was a millionaire. People don't think about Bob like that because he wasn't flexing. He wasn't wearing his chains and, going wild and getting the ice grill. Bob was just a modest dude, but he was a millionaire through his brand. And of course, the Kowalskis helped him get there. That they deserve their own part of that. I'm not saying that they didn't, but not the cutthroat. I'm all afterwards. No way, man. That's just not right. Happy Accidents, Betrayal and Greed. Watch it on Netflix. It's heartbreaking, but it's a full, complete picture. Or at least it's another side. I can't say it's a full, complete picture. At least it's another side that you might not know, you might not have heard. But so again, where I'm coming from is this idea with this image of Van Gogh as Bob Ross. Bob becomes ultimately successful and then has it stolen away. Van Gogh lives his whole life without a penny to his name and then becomes only successful. Portrait of Dr. Gachet sells for $85 million years after his death. Tragic. But the reason why I came all the way through to this, Bob, is I have used for my project now AI in places where I can train it on my art. I say, here's my stuff. Here's what I'm doing. Now I'm creating this compendium and I've got this whole lore I'm building out, and I don't have time to draw all 80 illustrations I need for this book. I need this illustration to look like this. And this is how I would do it. Here's the imagery. Here's what I want it to look like. Here's what it needs to say and do. And then it creates it as me. But people just want to throw the whole baby out with the bathwater. I'm using it as a tool. And then they will say, oh, but this is AI. Well, yeah, I can create this. Am I supposed to? This goes back to that Hollywood idea of them not being able to take a risk and a gamble. Am I not supposed to use a tool that now can help scale my imagination that is anything but AI slop? My imagination, my creativity, the depths of where all these things go. Am I supposed to just, put some sort of shackles on myself and some sort of beat myself and say, oh, no, be a purist, whatever that means. I'm sorry. It's just not how I won't do it that way. I'm going to use it. Now, if we're going to talk about, are there ramifications environmentally? That's a whole different conversation. Of course, are we going to talk about, are there ramifications of money and taxes and all these? Yeah, of course, I'm sure there are, and we can talk about all those things. But as far as creativity goes, that's where I'm trying to focus on this conversation, because it shouldn't be in the equation the way that it is in my mind. Every movement has ancestors. Every innovation has roots. The artist isn't creating from a vacuum. We're standing on a mountain of influence. It's whether we're talking about Shakespeare or Spielberg, Van Gogh or Basquiat, the Beatles, or Kanye West, which if we're going to talk about swastikas on the floor, we should talk about Kanye West. If you don't know, Kanye West is a Nazi. I mean, it's not like there's things you don't say. You don't get to say, oh, this person's a Nazi because it's somebody you disagree with. Kanye West has self-professed to Nazism. He has a song on his latest album called Hail Hitler. So it's not like an abstraction. He's owned that, which makes people uncomfortable. Sorry, but it's true. But think about sampling. Sampling in hip hop. If you don't know what that is, you take a sample of a song, a section, you twist it, you chop and screw it, you do some stuff to it, you mix it up, right? People will tell you Kanye's a musical genius. And maybe he is, but this contradiction is here in hip hop for sure. He samples so much. He chops, he rearranges, he stretches, he recontextualizes. And again, not away from his politics and his lack of humanity or whatever is going on in his brain up there. Musically, you could say he's doing something genius, but you weren't saying like, hey, Kanye, everyone wants to laud him as a genius, but he's so often using other people's work. He takes pieces of existing music, but then transforms them into something new. The transformation, how he transforms it, is where the art lies. And nobody hears the finished product and mistakes it for the source material. Sometimes in hip hop, it's really close to the source. But sometimes it's really, really so far away that it takes a little bit of discernment to get there. But I love hip hop. I mean, I grew up and a lot of my music, early music, is influenced by hip hop, and I have hip hop music myself that I've created. And I love the concept. And I think so many people in our culture love hip hop and revere it. But the source can be an ingredient and not the meal. Like, again, Vanilla Ice. That song, they got into trouble because it wasn't just inspired. He wasn't transforming or synthesizing. It's just the exact same musical structure. It's just different. And that's where I think the conversation gets confused, because treating all influence as though it's identical is crazy. It's not. There's a difference between studying Picasso and photocopying Picasso. There's a difference between learning from Bob Ross and forging a Bob Ross painting. And in fact, like I said, the one painting that I have in my series is me following a Bob Ross tutorial. That's like right there in front of me. But I'm not claiming that it's just my painting. Like, this is something I did following Bob Ross. There's a difference between listening to Chuck Berry and pretending that you wrote Johnny B. Good. We already understand these distinctions. We've understood them for centuries. We've understood them, but then people suddenly lose their minds when AI enters the conversation. And I don't really think it's about theft. That's maybe the smoke screen. I think the deeper fear is just something else entirely. I think AI is forcing people to confront something that's maybe just uncomfortable. That the human brain itself, is just a remix machine. At the beginning of every episode, I say, I am these things and I am none of these things. Because I know I'm a remix machine, but I'm also like, man, I don't want to be framed only by these things that you might think I am. But what am I? What is a personality? What is creativity? We spend our lives collecting data in some manner. Songs, books, movies, conversations, heartbreaks, dreams, religions, teachers, parents, enemies, lovers. We absorb all of it. And then somehow our brain performs a miracle. It rearranges those experiences into a perspective. And that perspective becomes what you call yourself, your identity, your voice, your art. But again, think about how many people's identities are synthesized, because they're just tribal. There's a hat mandate. It says you must wear this hat. Wherever your mind went on that, that's up to you. But if we're honest, our voice is partly inherited. Our language came from someone else. Our ideas come from somewhere else. Our values come from somewhere. Our stories come from somewhere. We didn't invent the language. And this is a large language model. We didn't invent storytelling. We inherit these things. Then we transform them. Maybe that's why the conversation feels so unsettling, because AI is just holding up a mirror, not to art, to us. And the reflection is asking, an uncomfortable question. What if originality is never what we thought it was? What if genius isn't creating something from nothing? What if genius is taking 10,000 influences and combining them in a way nobody else could see? And what I'm getting at is that AI can't see it. AI can't see that combination either. What if the magic was never the ingredients? What if the magic was the arrangement? I think I've talked about this here before, but if I haven't, it's like we're talking about ingredients. A cook versus a chef, right? A chef arranges ingredients in a magical way through taste. Now, until this is a really specific point, because I think art, music, culture, painting, drawing, storytelling, these are their tastes. And the people are the taste makers. So we have to arrange based on taste. And if you don't have taste, it's going to be sloppy. It's going to be AI slop. And a cook just follows the ingredient list. A cook just follows the recipe. The chef creates the recipe. And this is one place until, again, AI has taste buds, which I think is probably pretty far out. Maybe not. But AI can't taste. It can't taste culture. And it specifically can't taste ingredients. The computer cannot taste. So as we're looking at becoming chefs, we have to look at the only way we can do this is by our experience. And that's what I'm saying. Artificial intelligence isn't going to mess with our experience in that manner. And if we're worried about AI slop, we should be worried equally about human slop. It's the same thing. So AI is synthesizing, but that's not some sacred new crime. Last time I checked, rock and roll itself was built from borrowed fire. The Beatles didn't emerge from a vacuum. Led Zeppelin didn't descend from Mount Sinai, holding riffs carved into stone tablets. Hip hop didn't appear out of thin air. Crates were dug through. It's the digging. That's what matters. If you just sample anything as a hip hop artist, you sample something and it sounds goofy. You rearrange it sounds goofy. It's uninspired. Then it's going to be called slop. It's the people who knew how to dig for the right sample in hip hop that mattered. Cinema didn't invent storytelling. Van Gogh, again, didn't invent thick brushstrokes. Picasso, Bob Dylan, he didn't invent folk music. We absorb, we remix, we reinterpret, mutate ideas through perspective. That's culture, that's civilization, that's art. Machines doing it at a scale that's surpassing what humans can synthesize in a single moment, potentially. But the process isn't unnatural, no. You listen to thousands of songs, watched hundreds of films, absorbed conversations, heartbreak, religion, politics, childhood memories, commercial jingles, trauma, cartoons, dreams, Bob Ross, and eventually your consciousness turns that chaos into something else. It's called inspiration when a human does it. But now when a machine does it, suddenly everybody wants to become a copyright law philosopher. And that's all I'm saying. As far as the legal goes, there's a difference between influence and duplication, between direct replication and inspiration. And all of this is what allowed hip hop to become one of the greatest artistic revolutions in modern history. We don't look at a great producer and say, that's not art because it came from somewhere else. We call it genius. We call the turntable an instrument. That's my piece.
Good artists borrow, great artists steal. So what in Bob's name is AI doing?
Perception is reality. Perspective shapes the world around you. I'm JJ Weinberg, and this is my perspective.